Welcome to this lecture on engendering art. In this lecture, I would be discussing the representation of several art forms, specifically with reference to an interpretation based on gender. So, this very well can be described as genderization of art. Continuing my discussion on the issue of representation of Ganikas, most Yakshis as well as Ganikas were projected with specific features and specific body forms like a very attractive face, rounded hips, large breasts and slender waist, as well as richly ornamented, and they were projected as codified beings like the Sal Bhanjikas as well as Yakshis. However, unlike the Yakshis who were sculpted as single figures and they were given a more prominent kind of a depiction, the Ganikas were usually seen with an ensemble of figures. So, Ganikas were usually surrounded by a number of other figures which could be men as well as women. Some of them could be the helpers, while some others could be the partners. So, therefore, the entire Ganika tradition can be described as reflection of the lifestyle and how this lifestyle has been portrayed in art. And several scholars are of the view that the ornamental and decorated representations of several female figurines are mostly inspired by the living style of the Ganikas, which was the norm of the day. Now, this is also indicative of the kind of prevalent urban culture which required some kind of models and replicas, which in the urban as well as the royal kind of paraphernalia were forwarded in the form of Ganikas. So, Ganikas clearly emerged as public women and they could be reproduced in several forms in the sculptures. Now, coming to the whole issue of public and private women, the voluptuous female figurines with splendid ornaments, draperies and poses that were represented in the early Indian art have been described as of those belonging to the Ganikas, that is the public women or the courtesans, because the patriarchal norms did not favor the representation of the queens or wives in such a sensuous way. So, there emerged in course of the time a Ganika's realm, and as has been depicted by several art historians, particularly Seema Bawa, two types of sculptures, that is a series of reliefs that could be identified with the Ganika Vasant Sena, who was the main character of the play Daridra Charudat as well as Mrichakattikam, and the narrative, the second narrative was that of depicting the Ganika Amrapali while she was making a donation of the mango grove to the Buddhist Sangha. So, the image of Vasant Sena that appears in some of these sculptures, the most complete surviving representation is found on the Maholi panel from Mathura, which basically belongs to the late 2nd century CE and belonging to the Kushana period and made of red Sikri sandstone. This can also be described as the kneeling woman, because the scene is that of a woman kneeling, apparently drunk and probably under the influence of liquor. So, she is supported on one of the sides by a dwarf and on the other side by a man of natural proportion, while on one of the sides is another woman who is kind of ordinary looking and she is lesser voluptuous than the central figure. Now, this kneeling woman is kind of supported by the another kneeling woman is supported by two male companions, and and also an attendant, and the reverse of a double-sided panel depicting scenes from Mritshakatika, again belonging to the Kushana and made in red sandstone. Now, if you look at this figure, then this is the kind of kneeling woman Vasantasena, who was probably under the influence of liquor and who had to be helped in order to get up. Now, women fleeing Chhatradharini and two males, reverse of a double-sided panel, again depicting scenes from Mritshakatika, made in red sandstone, also fall in this category. Now, there were several portrayals of women of palace who were enjoying madhupan as well as music, and this was the way of life probably as far as the Ganikas or the public women were concerned. So, a male holding the arms of the female in a very constraining manner and with female attendants and a curtain in the background has been again found belonging to the Kusana period. So, you can say that there was a specific manner in which public women could be displayed and lot of liberties could be taken by showing them in this particular way. So, there was considerable acceptance of nudity probably in the public domain. They were publicly displayed at religious sites and were seen by all members of the community, and these were not probably real women. The figures represented either a spirit or a goddess or at the most a Ganika. So, what was the logic behind the Yakshis? Yakshis, who were also projected as voluptuous and nude, were probably promises of paradise, the reward that a devoted Buddhist or a Jain might expect during their rebirth in heaven. So, therefore, this tantricism and the influence of philosophical tradition had an impact on the way the worshippers perceived these kind of images as not sexual or sensual or erotic, rather they were perceived as symbols of fertility or abstract notions of paradise, and sometimes the nude goddess was also seen as an image of fertility. Now, this kind of a portrayal was definitely quite different from that of an ordinary woman. It was assumed that nudity bestows some sense of power on the goddess or Yakshi by showing her unfettered by the constraints of humanity, by the constraints of female physical form, and this constraint, however, was there for rest of the women. So, the goddess shared a lot in common with the rich courtesan, and both emerged as very powerful female figures and very different and very attractive from ordinary women. Now, it is in this background that one needs to understand some other principles associated with the sculptural depiction, and this is the concept of Mithuna, which was the peculiar symbol that was found in the art dated to the Sunga, Kusana, Satvahana period, and later on also in several of Khajuraho statues. So, the representations of Mithuna or Maithuna and the erotic group, as was suggested by Devangana Desai, were the elementary erotic motive, where the word Mithuna indicates a couple who may or may not be involved in a physical relationship, whereas Maithuna indicated a couple in coitus. So, the expression erotic group has been used for several scenes which depict more than two people in physical activities, and they were of different types. Now, if we talk about the types of Mithuna sculptures, they are also of several categories, where one man is seen with two women, which was kind of a polygamous relationship between a husband and the two or more wives, and where one woman is seen with two men was probably falling in the Ganika tradition or in the tradition of the Devadasi. So, a copulating couple being helped by a male or a female or a knock attendant or attendants was fairly common as a description in the art form. So, therefore, one can explain this kind of projection of female figures as art indicating a particular kind of a narrative, and this was the narrative that was the discourse of religion, text as well as images. So, therefore, the constant engagement with the visual as well as the textual material is what can make art history come alive. So, art as well as related literature, they both mirror and reinforce gender differences, something that has been beautifully explained by several art historians. So, any kind of analysis of donations or patronage patterns can also be understood with this kind of a standpoint, that is the gender specific agency of patronage that is rarely depicted in the form of sculptures. So, it is now with this kind of a background that we move on to the next stage, that is the Gupta period from 320 CE to 550 CE. One specific image that is repeatedly shown in various sculptural forms is that of matrikas, or the diverse folk goddesses of the soldiers. This kind of sculpture was quite popular, and these there were several popular goddesses in the village, and they are ever omnipresent in the Gupta art. So, the matrikas were kind of acknowledged by the Gupta rulers, and their images were also carved on the royal monuments in order to identify the loyalty and adherence of the armed forces also. So, again this was kind of an appropriation of the local culture in a largely emerging feudal polity. So, this entire transformation of matrikas from local to court goddesses is largely visible at the time of the Gupta kings Skandagupta and Kumaragupta I, who made Skand their model, and they elevated the position of Skanda's foster mothers, the matrikas, from a cluster of folk goddesses to the position of court goddesses. So, by 4th century in Parhari, a rock cut shrine solely devoted to Sapta Matrika emerged, and the evidence of Matrika sculptures was further pronounced during the Gurjar Pratihara period from 8th to 10th century, as well as the Chandela period from 8th to 12th century CE. Now, coming to the Khajuraho narrative. On the walls of the Khajuraho temples, several aspects of Indian life are depicted together with gods and goddesses, in addition to warriors, animals, birds, musicians, and the most common and popular depictions which have been carved are related to women and sexuality. So, if we consider the philosophy behind the sculptural depictions of women, there is a concept called Nari Bandha. So, the Nari, according to the contemporary art treatise, the Nari Bandha was very important in any kind of architecture, and if there was no depiction of a beautiful and a young woman on the walls of a monument, then it was probably not a monument worth looking at. This was the kind of logic that was given in the contemporary art shastras, and women have been profusely depicted therefore on several walls of Khajuraho, and according to Silpa Prakash, which was a 10th century art text from Orissa, there was a clear instruction to the sculptor that how they must depict 16 types of women to decorate a monument, and how these women should be carved within the confines of an upright angle. So there was a specific way, the way a monument could be made and decorated, and the existence of women on the walls in order to decorate or enhance the beauty as well as divinity of that particular monument was considered as the norm. Now, there was a varied description of these 16 kinds of women. So, these could be described as a woman looking into a mirror or a darpana, then a woman conveying alasa, that was in a relaxed and an indolent stage, then in a ketaki bandha, that is trying to decorate her body with the ketaki flower, and then a nartaki, a dancer, and also in a vinyasa mood, that is in a pensive mood, probably waiting for someone. So, this was the kind of varied description, and these 16 kinds of women have been depicted in various art scenes, and some of these kinds of women are easily visible in the Khajuraho sculptures. The gods have been shown generally along with their partners, warmly looking at their wives, who in turn are looking very emotionally at their husbands. So, this godly representation appeared slightly different from the Ganika tradition, and the varied roles in which these women were depicted were in the form of apsaras as well as heavenly nymphs, sura sundaris or naikas, Ganikas as well as Sal Bhanjikas, which again was a very common and a recurrent theme. So, the female figure is one of the female figure is also shown writing a letter on one of the temple walls, indicating that some women were probably also literate during this period, and letter writing was a valid activity. Now, most of the Khajuraho images, as the preceding sculptures, they exist with very rounded and voluptuous forms, and also they are depicted in the high or the medium relief on the outer as well as the inner walls, pillars as well as the ceilings. So, these sculptures basically indicate three different worlds or three different realms. The three different realms that are indicated are the Patal Lok, or the which basically shows the Nag Kanya or the serpent girls with cobras hoods. Then another realm that was increasingly shown was the mortal world, in which it was the Naika or the beautiful lady or a temple girl that was replicated. And then there was the heaven, or the Swarg Lok, which basically was indicated by existence of apsaras or sura sundaris or several nymphs. So, the concept of Nag Kanya, which indicated the beauty of the divine nature, was simply some kind of a procreation to prove that women have developed as a force from darkness to the eternal conscious, and it also was linked to the concept of Shakti or the cosmic power, and hence can be understood with reference to influence of Tantricism, which was increasing during this period. So, these Nagins are shown in the hidden recesses of the temple, and they are not very visible, easily visible on the outside panels. So, the Khajuraho's concept of union, what exactly it was and what do these various sculptural forms indicate? It basically indicated that how the earthly woman was created for the delight as well as for the consumption of man, and in order to fill a void through this union. So, the Khajuraho sculptures can be described as visionary ideals of beauty as well as expressions of love of life as well as joys of existence, also some kind of tantric influence. So, these kind of varied descriptions of these various sculptures can help us identify specific themes. Now, the varied moods and the movements that were depicted in several of these sculptures were like beautifying the body as well as writing on the wall or playing with a ball, so a playful mood, or just admiring oneself, or painting, or pulling out a thorn. So, these were all day to day usual normal activities that were projected. Now, from here we go to the next level of discussion, and that is the existence and the projection of the Devdasi system, because this again has gender construct. So, the first reference to dancing girls in temples is found in Kalidasa's Meghdut. It is said that dancing girls were present at the time of worship in the temple of Ujjain. So, the custom of dedicating girls to temples became quite common during the 6th century CE, as most of the texts also contain reference to it, and these texts that largely had been composed during this period. So, there were several textual traditions that kind of recommended that arrangements should be made to kind of enlist the services of singing girls and dancing girls for the worship at temples. And by the end of 10th century, the total number of Devdasis in several temples increased directly in proportion to the resources and prestige of that temple. So, larger the number of resources a temple acquired, larger the number of Devdasis it could engage, and the same tendency continued during the medieval period, where Devdasis continued to be a very important and a very normal establishment, a part of the establishment. For example, there were 400 Devdasis who were attached to the temples at Tanjore and Travancore, and they were kind of performing a very important religious and cultural functions. The popularity of Devdasis seems to have reached its height around the 10th and the 11th centuries CE, and these Devdasis were both men as well as women who were dedicated to the temple and the various services attached to religion. So, they developed the system of music as well as dance that was employed during the various temple festivals. However, soon there was a decline in the status of Devdasis due to rise and fall of a number of temples, and as the temples became poorer, or they lost their patronage, or the kingdoms changed, or there was influx of there was establishment of Turkish, there was establishment of rule of Delhi Sultanate, and in some cases in gradual course of change, some temples got destroyed. The Devdasis were forced into a life of poverty, misery and prostitution. Whether the Devdasis engaged in sexual services or not is debated and is a contentious issue. Now, one can also talk about the regional variation in the tradition of Devdasis. The Chola Empire encouraged the Devdasi system, and in Tamil they were known as Devar Adigalar. Devar means God, and in Tamil Adigalar meant the servants. So, they were God's servants, and there are several inscriptions that reveal that the 400 dancers, their gurus and orchestras were maintained by the Brihadishwarar temple, Thanjavur, with magnificent grants. So, this the entire Devdasi system in South India developed as a very important institution that could not be overlooked. Now, erotica as art language has been reinforced time and again. So, the trend that had started in the prehistoric times and then continued to Harappa and Mohenjo-daro probably got modified into representational art of India several centuries later. So, the Kama Sutra that emerged as a distinct treatise on art and sexuality, and the erotica got essayed in the paintings as well as sculptures of monuments. So, it is both the textual as well as the artistic tradition that have thrown light on this tendency. The presence of 64 yogini temples near Khajuraho as well as in Konark, etc., point their roots to the emergence of several tantric traditions which revolved around the ultimate union of the male and the female energy in forms that were referred to as the Maithuna, and this largely explains the depiction of these kind of sculptures. So, as you can see on the image, this is the image of one of the yogini temples, the outside image of one of the yogini temples, and then the Chaussat yogini temple, the kind of images that were developed of various yoginis. Then one of the panels of Khajuraho depicts the kind of depictions that I have just talked about. Now, there was also a lot of regional art efflorescence, and depiction of women are exhibited in the Markandeshwar temple, Maharashtra, then Padavali temple, Madhya Pradesh, Meenakshi temple in Madurai, Ranakpur Jain temples in Rajasthan, Sun temple Orissa and Gujarat, Ocean in Rajasthan, then Virupaksha temple in Karnataka, and of course Khajuraho in Orissa and several others. So, one can say that the kind of art that had been developing throughout this period was not only for the pleasure, it was also art to fulfill the spiritual requirements, and these monuments or temples explain the beautiful and elegantly sculpted woman as a demanding and a dominating and also fearless woman who kind of was there in order to promote the sexuality, in order to promote the fertility, and the Ranakpur Jain temples in Rajasthan show a panel depicting several experimental scenes with a central queen like figure seated on a throne. This clearly is indicative of the tantric influences. So, besides Hindu and Buddhist, erotic art also found their flavors among Jains as it connected to the Digambara ideology or the tantric cult. So, in Buddhist ideology, the representation of women that has been visible in places like Sanchi, Bharhut, Amravati, Mathura, Ajanta and Ellora are some of the key sites where Buddhist art showing the Buddha as well as the Bodhisattvas can be found. The representation of women in Buddhist art comes mainly in the form of Tara, who was a female Buddhist deity and the goddess of universal compassion. As is visible in this Buddhist, in the depiction of this Buddhist deity Tara, the idea was not only physical pleasure, the idea was not to convey the physical beauty, but the idea was to attain nirvana, to attain the virtuous and the enlightened action. So, Tara enabled living beings to cross the ocean of existence and suffering and guided them towards the path of enlightenment. So, there was some kind of a disconnection from the physical pleasures of the temple art, and the Buddhist depiction had more of peace and serenity in its various forms, and the emphasis was clearly on the pleasure of the soul rather than on the pleasure of the eyes or enhancing the physical beauty. Besides Tara, this form of art also represented human beings with large eyes, half closed, then also lotus shaped lips, as well as very feminine bodies and gestures that highlighted the sacrificial or calm, poised and tranquility that is generally associated with the issue of womanhood. Now, having discussed all these various art forms, I have incorporated some kind of a gender analysis, and I hope that you would also benefit, and you would also go back and read some of the resources that have been shared. Thank you.